Lonely Cowboy walked into Red Rock for peace, but found a war in her eyes. Jack rode into Red Rock after a long, tiring journey. The sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows on the dirt road as his horse's hooves kicked up dust with every step. The town was smaller than he'd expected, nothing more than a few weathered buildings clustered together under the vast desert sky. Red Rock wasn't much, but it was enough for what Jack needed. Peace. Breath. After years of traveling, fighting, and living a life that seemed more like a battle than anything else, Jack was ready for some quiet. He'd heard about the town from some of the drifters he'd met along the way. Red Rock was known for being a place where people didn't ask too many questions, and where trouble seemed to stay far away. That suited Jack just fine. Despotis. He wasn't looking for adventure. He was just looking to rest, find a room at the inn, and perhaps sit for a few quiet meals. He needed to forget about the past, forget about the things he had done, and just let the world slip away for a while. As he rode through the town's main street, Jack couldn't help but notice how still everything was. The town seemed to be waiting for something, but it wasn't clear what that something was. The saloon doors swung lazily in the wind, and a few old men sat on the porch of the general store, chewing on tobacco and watching Jack with mild curiosity. It was a town that didn't seem to mind strangers, as long as they didn't cause trouble. Jack tied his horse to a post near the inn and went inside. The place was small but clean, the kind of place where the scent of wood and tobacco filled the air, and the old lady behind the counter gave him a welcoming smile. He paid for a room and took the key, but before he could head upstairs to settle in, something caught his attention. Outside the window of the inn, standing in front of the general store, was a woman. At first glance, she didn't seem like anything special. She wasn't dressed in a fancy way, and she wasn't smiling. In fact, she looked serious, maybe even a little troubled. But there was something in the way she stood, something that made Jack pause. She had a presence about her that was impossible to ignore. Her eyes, dark and intense, seemed to hold a story that Jack couldn't quite read. There was pain there, but also strength. He could tell she wasn't someone who easily showed weakness. As Jack stood there, staring out the window, the woman glanced up and caught his eye. For a brief moment their gazes locked, and Jack felt something shift in him, like the air around them had changed. She didn't smile, didn't wave, didn't acknowledge him in any way. She simply looked at him, her expression unreadable. Jack quickly turned away from the window, feeling a strange sensation stir inside him. He had never been the kind of man to get distracted by a woman, not after everything he had been through. But there was something about her, something that pulled at him. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but it bothered him. He was supposed to be here for peace, not to get tangled up in someone else's problems. Later that night, after a simple dinner at the inn, Jack found himself walking back to his room. But as he passed the general store, he saw her again. She was still standing there, though it was getting late. The street was nearly empty, the last light of the day fading into the darkening sky.
Jack hesitated, his boots almost reluctant to take another step.
"Hey there," he called out, his voice breaking the silence between them. The woman turned to face him. Her eyes were still hard, but there was something almost weary in them now, like she was tired of looking at the world with so much caution. She said nothing for a long moment, just studying him in a way that made Jack feel both seen and invisible at the same time. "I'm Jack," he said after a beat, trying to break the tension. "Just passing through." Her gaze softened a little, but not much. "Clara," she replied simply, her voice quiet but firm. They stood there for another awkward moment, neither of them knowing what to say next. Clara seemed like someone who didn't waste time with small talk, and Jack, feeling strangely out of place, didn't try to push it. "Ha ha! I don't mean to interrupt," he said, tipping his hat. "Just thought I'd say hello." She nodded, her lips pressing together in a tight line. "I'm fine," Jack had a feeling she wasn't just talking about her well-being. He could sense something more, like a wall she had built around herself, a wall that kept others from getting too close. He couldn't blame her. Jack had built his own walls a long time ago. "Well, if you need anything," he began, but before he could finish, Clara turned away without a word and walked back into the shadows of the store. Jack stood there for a moment, his heart strangely heavy. He had come to Red Rock to escape the noise of the world, but already he could feel that the peace he had been looking for might not be so easy to find, and something told him that Clara, with her troubled eyes and quiet strength, had something to do with that. As he made his way back to the inn, he couldn't shake the image of her standing there waiting, almost as if she was trapped in a war that Jack couldn't see. She was a woman who carried more than just the weight of her past. She carried something far more dangerous, the fire of someone who had been burned one too many times and wasn't sure she could ever let it go. The next day, Jack couldn't stop thinking about Clara. After his brief conversation with her the night before, he had expected her to be just another tough, independent woman in a town like Red Rock. But there was something about her that lingered in his mind. The quiet strength in her eyes, the way she carried herself, and the feeling that she was hiding something. A secret, perhaps, or a past that she could never let go of. He spent the morning walking through the town, trying to push thoughts of Clara from his mind, but they kept coming back, like the sound of a distant drumbeat. The sun hung high in the sky, and the heat made the streets shimmer with a haze. But nothing could distract Jack from the image of Clara's face, her eyes dark and unreadable. He tried to find peace by wandering around the outskirts of town, but there was no peace to be found. The land here was harsh and unforgiving, just like the people. Jack had seen it all before. Men with hardened faces, women with guarded hearts. He had never been one to form attachments, especially after everything he had been through. The war, the fights, the endless days on the trail, it all left him with little faith in anything. But Clara, she was different. She wasn't like the others. There was something in her that made Jack feel as if he needed to understand her, to uncover the story hidden behind her cold exterior. Later that afternoon, Jack decided to go to the saloon. It was the only place in town where people seemed to gather, where he could grab a drink and maybe, just maybe, clear his head. As he walked inside, the noise of conversation and laughter hit him, but it didn't feel like a place of peace. It felt like a place where people went to forget their own troubles, just as Jack was trying to do. He walked up to the bar and ordered a whiskey. The bartender was a big man with a thick beard and a rough voice. "You're not from around here," the bartender said, setting the glass down in front of Jack. "No, just passing through," Jack replied, his fingers tightening around the glass. The bartender nodded. "Most folks don't stay long. Town's seen its share of trouble, especially with the outlaws roaming through. But it's quiet for now. Real quiet." Jack didn't answer. He wasn't here to talk about the town's troubles. Bus. He was here to drink and forget. Or at least, that was the plan. As he sipped his drink, Jack's eyes wandered over to the far side of the room, where a group of men were playing cards. And there she was again, Clara. She was sitting at a table, alone, watching the card game with an intensity that made Jack uneasy. Her posture was stiff, her face set in that same hard expression, but there was something in her eyes that told Jack she wasn't just watching the game. By it, she was waiting for something. Or maybe she was trying to avoid something. Jack's heart skipped a beat, and before he knew it, his feet were moving toward her. He didn't think. He just acted, as if some invisible force was pulling him toward her. When Clara saw him approaching, she didn't smile or greet him. But she just looked up, her eyes cold as ever, but with a flicker of something. Surprise, maybe, or confusion. Jack stopped at her table, unsure of what to say. She didn't invite him to sit, but she didn't tell him to leave either. The silence between them grew, thick and uncomfortable, brusque. "I didn't expect to see you here," Jack said, breaking the silence. Clara didn't respond immediately. Back centered and said, she simply raised an eyebrow almost as if she was questioning his presence. "Need some company?" Jack asked, trying to make light of the situation. Clara's lips pressed into a thin line. I don't need anyone," she said, her voice low but firm. "Not now. Not ever."
Jack could feel the weight of her words, like a heavy stone dropped into the water. He knew she didn't mean it to be cruel, but the pain in her voice was unmistakable.
It was the kind of pain that didn't come from a single loss, but from a life full of them. A life where trust had been broken too many times, where survival was more important than friendship, and where love was something that could never be allowed to grow. "I'm just trying to be friendly," Jack said, his voice softer now as he took a seat across from her. "You don't have to talk if you don't want to, but I'm not here to cause trouble." Clara's gaze softened for a brief moment, and Jack could see the conflict in her eyes. She didn't want to admit that she needed someone, anyone, but there it was, a flicker of something more than just anger. She had been alone for so long that the idea of letting someone in, even just a little, scared her. "I don't need saving," she muttered, her hands resting on the table in front of her. "I've learned to take care of myself." Jack nodded, understanding more than she realized. He wasn't here to save her, and he didn't expect her to save him either. They were two people who had been through too much to rely on anyone else, but for some reason, Jack felt drawn to her. He didn't know why. Maybe it was the way she carried her pain, or maybe it was the way she fought to protect herself. But whatever it was, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that he had to understand her, even if she didn't want him to. There was a long silence between them, and Jack could feel the tension growing. The sound of the card game in the background faded, and all he could hear was the quiet hum of the saloon. He could feel Clara's eyes on him, studying him, waiting for him to say something, anything. "I'm not here to make you trust me," Jack said finally, "but I'm not going anywhere." Clara's eyes flickered, and for the first time Jack saw something other than coldness in them. There was a hint of uncertainty, of doubt. And maybe, just maybe, a tiny spark of hope. "I'm not a damsel in distress," she replied, her voice quieter now, almost softer. "I never said you were," Jack said with a small smile. "But everyone needs someone, even if they don't want to admit it." Clara didn't say anything to that. Instead, she stood up, her chair scraping against the floor as she pushed it back. "I'll be fine," she said, not meeting his eyes as she turned to leave the saloon. Jack watched her go, feeling that same unease settle in his chest. There was more to Clara than she was letting on, and Jack knew that he hadn't seen the last of her. He finished his drink, the silence of the saloon now pressing down on him. Maybe he hadn't found the peace he was looking for in Red Rock, but one thing was for sure. The war in Clara's eyes was a battle that he couldn't walk away from. The days passed slowly in Red Rock, and Jack found himself caught in the rhythm of the town. The heat of the day gave way to cool nights, and the town's quietness began to settle into his bones. He had hoped for peace, but peace was elusive. Every time he thought he could escape his past, he found his thoughts drifting back to Clara. There was something about her that kept pulling him back, even when he told himself it was none of his business. He had tried to stay busy working around the inn and taking care of his horse, but it was hard to ignore the way the town seemed to whisper about Clara. Some of the old men at the saloon talked about her in hushed tones when they thought no one was listening. They spoke of her father, the rancher who had died in a skirmish with a group of outlaws years ago. They said she had been left to fend for herself, taking up arms to protect her family's land. They spoke of her strength and determination, but there was something darker in their voices. A quiet respect. tinged with fear.
Jack didn't need to hear the rumors.
He had seen enough to understand. Clara wasn't just a woman who had lost her father. She was a woman who had been forced to become something more, something harder, just to survive. And Jack knew that kind of pain all too well. He had fought in wars, lost friends, and seen too many battles that left scars deeper than what the eye could see. He had tried to tell himself that he wouldn't get involved. He had come to Red Rock for peace, not to get tangled in someone else's troubles. But every time he saw Clara standing alone or walking through the streets with her chin lifted high, Jack couldn't help but feel a pull. She carried her pain like a shield, and it made her untouchable. But Jack didn't give up that easily. There was something in her that made him want to try. Something that made him feel like he could offer her a different kind of strength. One afternoon, as Jack was walking back from the stables, he saw her again. Clara was standing by the edge of her family's land, her eyes fixed on the horizon. The late afternoon sun cast a golden glow over everything, making the scene look almost peaceful. But Jack knew better. Clara wasn't the kind of woman who stood around waiting for things to get better. She was always prepared for a fight, whether it was with the land, with the people in town, or with herself. Jack hesitated for a moment before approaching her. He had no plan, no idea what he was going to say. But something inside him urged him forward, and before he knew it, he was standing beside her. Clara didn't look at him at first. She stood there, as if lost in thought, her back straight and her expression unreadable. The silence between them stretched, and Jack didn't know if she was even aware of his presence. "You're a hard woman to talk to," Jack said, his voice breaking the quiet. Clara turned her head slightly but didn't make eye contact. "I didn't ask for company," she replied, her tone blunt and even. Jack smiled, though there was no humor in it. "I didn't figure you did, but here I am." She let out a soft sigh, but there was no anger in it, just a weariness that Jack could hear in the way she breathed.
"What do you want, Jack?"
she asked, finally looking at him. Her eyes were guarded, but there was something softer there now, a hint of vulnerability that made Jack's heart ache. "I'm not sure," Jack replied honestly. "I came here looking for peace. Thought I'd find it in this quiet town, but you're here." Narration. "And something about that doesn't sit right with me." Clara frowned. "What do you mean?" Jack took a step closer, his eyes not leaving hers. "I'm not here to save you. I know you don't need saving, but I can't ignore the way you carry all that weight. It's like you're carrying every battle you've ever fought, and you're carrying it alone." Clara's jaw tightened, and Jack could see the walls she had built around herself hardened once again. "I don't need anyone," she said, her voice cold now, her eyes distant. "I've learned how to survive, and that's all I need." Jack nodded, understanding the words, but not the meaning behind them. He had heard the same thing from men who had fought in wars, men who had lost everything and convinced themselves that survival was all that mattered. He knew better than to argue with her, so instead, he let the silence speak for a moment. "I'm not asking you to trust me," Jack said quietly, "but I think you could use someone to share the load." Clara looked at him sharply. "You don't know what it's like. You don't know what I've been through." Jack met her gaze without flinching. "I know what it's like to lose everything, to feel like you're the only one left standing, to wonder if it's worth it to keep going." Clara stared at him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face as if trying to figure out if he was telling the truth. "And what makes you think I need someone like you?" "Because I'm not running away," Jack replied simply.
I don't need you to change, Clara.
I'm not here to fix you, but I am here. And I'm not leaving until you stop pushing me away. Clara's face softened, but just for a moment. She shook her head, her eyes still full of that guarded pain. You're wasting your time. Jack didn't say anything for a while. He simply watched her, feeling the weight of her words and knowing that he wasn't going to leave. He wasn't going to walk away from someone who needed help, even if she couldn't see it yet. I don't think I'm wasting my time, he finally said. But I guess we'll see.
Clara didn't respond.
Instead, she turned and began walking back toward the ranch house, her steps deliberate and firm. Jack stood there, watching her go. He didn't know if she would ever let him in, but he wasn't about to give up. She didn't have to ask for help, but that didn't mean he was going to stop offering it. As he turned to leave, Jack felt a strange sense of purpose. He had come to Red Rock looking for peace, but he had found something else. He had found someone who wasn't ready to trust, but who might just need someone to stand beside her. And Jack was more than willing to be that person. The sun had barely risen on the day that the first whispers of danger reached the town. Jack had been up early as usual, tending to his horse and cleaning his gear, when a rider came galloping into town, his horse kicking up dust in the dry morning air. The man was breathless, his eyes wide with fear. "Outlaws!" he yelled as he reined his horse to a stop in front of the saloon. "They're coming! A whole gang of them!" The town immediately went on high alert. People spilled out of the saloon, the general store, and the nearby houses, all looking to the rider for answers. "How many?" the bartender shouted, his face pale. "About 20, maybe more," the rider said, his voice shaking. "They're headed this way. They've already hit the ranches on the outskirts. If we don't do something, they'll take the whole town." Panic spread like wildfire. Red Rock had always been quiet, too small and too far from any major town to be worth much attention. But now, with the threat of an outlaw gang bearing down on them, the town's peace was shattered. Jack could see the fear in the eyes of the townspeople, but they weren't prepared for a fight. Many of them were farmers and shopkeepers, not fighters. But Jack wasn't like them. He had seen enough violence in his life to know how to respond. He didn't waste any time. He immediately started moving through the crowd, his mind already calculating the best course of action. But, as he turned the corner, he saw Clara. She was standing there, her face as unreadable as ever, watching the scene unfold. But there was something in her stance, something in the way she held herself that told Jack she wasn't going to wait for anyone to save her. She was already planning what to do. "I heard," she said, her voice cold. "We need to act fast." Jack nodded. "We can't just hide. These people need protection, and we need to get to them before the outlaws do." Clara didn't hesitate. She turned and walked toward the edge of town, her movements purposeful. Jack followed her, wondering if she had any idea what she was doing, or if she was just acting on instinct. Either way, he wasn't about to leave her to face the danger alone. Clara stopped at the edge of the main street, where a few old buildings stood, abandoned and forgotten. She looked around quickly, her eyes scanning for any sign of the approaching gang. Jack could see the tension in her shoulders, the weight of years of fear and survival pressing down on her. "They'll come from the east," Clara said, her voice low. "That's where the cover is."
"We need to make sure we don't give them an easy entry." Jack watched her for a moment, impressed by her calmness under pressure.
She had been living with this threat for so long, and yet she never showed any signs of backing down. If anything, her determination seemed to grow stronger with each passing second. "Let's set up a trap," Jack suggested, his mind already working through the details. We can use the hills for cover, but we'll need to funnel them into a spot where we can hit them hard. Clara turned to him, her eyes narrowing. I've been doing this long before you showed up, Cowboy, she said. But there was no anger in her voice, only a strange sort of respect. You stay close, and I'll show you how it's done. Jack nodded, not taking offense. He wasn't here to take charge. He was here to help. Clara had a plan, and he was more than willing to follow her lead. They worked quickly, moving through the town and gathering what little they had. Guns, knives, and anything else that could be used as a weapon. The townspeople, though frightened, began to pitch in. Following Clara's instructions, she directed them to key positions, her voice steady and sure. By the time the outlaws finally arrived, Red Rock was ready for them. Jack, Clara, and a few others took up positions behind the buildings, ready to ambush the gang as they rode through. Jack could feel his heart pounding in his chest. This wasn't just another fight. This was a fight for survival, for the town that had given him a place to rest. Bass. And for Clara, who had made it clear she wasn't going to let anyone take her home from her. The sound of horses approached, growing louder with each passing second. Jack crouched low, his gun at the ready. He could see the dust cloud rising in the distance, the silhouette of the outlaws emerging from the haze. Breaths. They were riding hard, confident, as if they expected no resistance, but Clara had already outsmarted them. At the right moment, Clara gave a sharp nod, and the ambush began. But shots rang out, echoing through the valley. The outlaws, surprised by the sudden attack, tried to regroup, but it was too late. Jack and Clara's plan had worked. The outlaws were caught in a crossfire, unable to move without exposing themselves. For a few tense moments, the town became a battlefield. Dust and smoke filled the air, and the sounds of gunfire and shouting echoed across the street. Jack kept moving, firing when necessary, but always watching Clara. She was everywhere at once, moving through the chaos like a force of nature, never slowing down, never hesitating. Psst. He saw her at the front of the town, standing tall as she fired at one of the outlaws. Her face was set in a grim expression, her eyes focused entirely on the task at hand. But she wasn't afraid, and she wasn't going to let anyone take Red Rock from her. When the dust finally settled, the outlaws were either dead or scattered. Clara stood in the center of it all, her gun still smoking in her hand. She was breathing heavily, but there was no sign of fear in her eyes, only relief. And something else. Something deeper. Jack approached her, his own adrenaline fading. "You did it," he said quietly. Clara turned to him, her eyes meeting his for the first time since the battle had begun. She didn't smile, but there was a flicker of something in her gaze, a silent acknowledgement. She had fought, and she had won. "I told you," she said, her voice low but steady. "I don't need saving." Jack nodded. He had come here looking for peace, but what he had found was something far more valuable. A town that had fought for its survival, and a woman who had made sure that it would. The dust had settled, and Red Rock was quiet again, though not in the same peaceful way it had been before. The air still felt heavy with the memory of the battle, with the tension that had been there only a few hours ago. But now, as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the town, the people of Red Rock were able to breathe again. The outlaws were gone, either scattered or lying in the dirt. The town had fought, and they had won. Jack stood near the edge of the main street, watching the townspeople begin to gather up the remains of the fight. Broken furniture, spent ammunition, and the bodies of the fallen outlaws. Some of the townsfolk went to the wounded, offering what little medical help they could, pay their way to the general store to restock on supplies. The town was in a state of controlled chaos, but it was a different kind of chaos than before. It was the kind of chaos that came with survival, the kind that meant they had made it through another day. Clara was still at the heart of it all. She was moving from person to person, her eyes sharp and her body tense. There was no time for rest for her. She was already planning the next steps, making sure no one was left behind, making sure the outlaws hadn't left any surprises in their wake. But Jack saw her for what she was in that moment. Not just the woman who had fought to protect her land, but someone who had fought for something deeper, something she had been protecting for far longer than she even realized. Jack had seen it in her eyes, the same fight that had been there when they first met. It was a fight that never stopped, a fight that lived in her every action. It was a fight born from pain, from loss, from a life lived on the edge. But now, as he watched her work, Jack realized something. She didn't have to be alone in that fight anymore. And maybe, just maybe, she didn't want to be.
"Clara," Jack called out, moving toward her. "She didn't turn right away."
She was talking to a few of the townspeople, giving orders, making sure everything was in order. But she heard his voice and finally looked over her shoulder. Her expression softened slightly, though there was still a guarded edge to her. "Everything's taken care of?" Jack asked, standing beside her.
"For now," Clara replied, her voice steady. "We'll need to keep watch tonight."
Who knows if more of them are out there? But we're safe for now. Narration. I think we can finally breathe. Jack nodded. He could see the exhaustion in her face, though she tried to hide it. There were no tears, no signs of weakness, just a woman who had done what needed to be done, and now she was moving on to the next task.
"Thank you," Jack said, and it was more than just a thank you for the battle they had just fought together.
It was a thank you for everything she had shown him about strength, survival, and what it truly meant to fight for something you loved. Clara's lips pressed into a thin line, but this time there was a hint of something else in her eyes. "I didn't do it for thanks," she said quietly. "I did it because it was my fight. Pray. And I'll keep fighting. That's all I know." Jack understood. She wasn't in it for gratitude. She had been fighting long before he showed up, and she would keep fighting long after he was gone. But Jack wasn't so sure he wanted to leave just yet. He had come to Red Rock looking for peace, but now, with Clara standing beside him, he realized that peace wasn't always about silence. This backs. Sometimes it was about finding someone who understood your battles, someone who could stand with you in the middle of the fight and help carry the load.
"I know," Jack said, his voice low. "But I think you could use a break, even if you don't want to admit it." Clara didn't argue.
She didn't need to. Instead, she stood there in silence, her eyes on the horizon, where the last light of the day was fading into the dark sky. For a moment, they both stood there together, just watching the world settle into a quiet stillness. "I never thought I'd be able to rest," Clara said softly. "Not after everything that's happened. But maybe it's time to start thinking about something more than just surviving." Jack didn't know if she was talking about herself, the town, or something deeper. But he knew one thing. Clara was stronger than most people he had ever met. And maybe, just maybe, she deserved something more than the constant fight. She deserved a chance to live, not just survive.
"We all deserve something more," Jack said, his voice steady.
But sometimes it's hard to see it when we're too busy fighting. Clara didn't answer right away. She just stood there, looking out at the town. The fight had been won, but the scars were still there, and the road ahead wasn't going to be easy. Jack could see that she wasn't ready to let go of the war inside her, but he also knew that she wasn't the same woman she had been before. Branch. She had changed, and so had he. Maybe, Clara finally said, her voice barely above a whisper.
Maybe there's a way to live without always fighting.
Jack gave her a small smile. He didn't know if it was possible, not yet, but he was willing to try.
And maybe that was enough for now. As the night grew darker, the two of them walked back toward the center of town, where the other townspeople were starting to gather, grateful for the peace they had won. There was still work to be done, still things to rebuild. But the worst was over. For tonight, Red Rock could rest. And so could Jack. The next morning, Jack woke up early, as he had every day since he had arrived in Red Rock. But today something felt different. The sun was still rising, the town was still quiet, but there was a sense of possibility in the air, something Jack hadn't felt in a long time. The war wasn't over for Clara. It might never be, but maybe it didn't have to be. Maybe they could fight together, and maybe together they could find a way to live, not just survive. Breath. As he walked out into the cool morning air, Jack knew one thing for sure. Red Rock wasn't just a town. It was a place where battles had been fought, and a place where new beginnings were possible. And with Clara by his side, Jack felt like maybe, just maybe, he had found the peace he had been searching for all along.